The humble self-help book dates back, in some form or other, to ancient Egypt. Today, in modern times, self-help was brought into a new era, with work like Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. The personal growth industry has had no shortage of success. It's worth more than $10 billion in the US alone in 2020. We all know books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Think and Grow Rich. And self-help has created its own celebrities: Tony Robbins, Deepak Chopra, Eckhart Tolle. The insight that they offer is greatly valued by many. But there's also a view that says it's all simply nonsense, and that's what we're going to find out. Healthier, happier, and more productive lives. What if getting older was not a challenge, but an opportunity to be embraced? It's the premise of The Longevity Imperative, the latest book from the economist Andrew Scott. Longer lives means society must reconsider the way we think about healthcare, relationships, the economy, finances, the lot. To do so, the way current governments are set up and think, the policies they follow, need to support a larger, ageing society. The idea of structured retirements, pensions, can they survive? Scott argues these changes can help us live not just longer, but healthier, happier, and more productive lives.
We've really got to adapt and adjust to the fact that for the first time ever, the young can now expect, greater than 50% chance of living into a 10th decade, and we just haven't prepared ourselves to do that. We haven't got the individual behaviours, the social norms, the health and work institutions that can make sure that we don't just live a long life, but we live a healthy and productive and engaged one.
Where does that leave you and me, the next generation that has to experience older age, whether we've made proper financial provision for it or not? We are facing many more years of retirement.
Well, that's an interesting question. Are we or not? I mean, for instance, in Denmark, the young are now expected to work till 74 till they get a state pension. For me, I think what I see happening is more and more people are working for longer. But what they're doing is sort of often going part-time as the last stage. So, for instance, in the 20th century, we decided that being old started at 65. That's a kind of a bit of an arbitrary choice. And then as life expectancy got longer and longer, we just took more and more years of leisure after retirement. I think what I'm seeing now is retirement is happening later. Every country around the world has an aging society. The birth rate's falling, people are living for longer. And I don't know, Richard, how you feel when I say the word aging society, but no one says, yeah, great, we've got an aging society. But it really is one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. So we've really got to think about this as time. Because, if your day went from 24 hours to 32 hours, you'd say, great, I've got more time. And that is the mindset change that we have to do with longevity.
As your book makes clear, that might be the thing we have to do, but everything in terms of existing structures, policies, procedures, militates against that. All the real hard structures, retirement age, pension age, they're all sort of militating not to create an environment for a longer productive working life.
No, completely. I completely agree. All governments are doing is raising the state pension age, which does nothing to keep working for longer. I think we're beginning to see countries wake up to it. So let's take the United Kingdom at the moment. There's around 3 million people unemployed because of long-term sickness. And a lot of those people are aged 50 to 65. In that situation, it's pretty pointless raising the state pension age, saying work for longer when you've got more and more people leaving the labour market. So I think we're beginning to see in the high-income countries a recognition that if I keep people healthy for longer, they can work for longer. And that's not about 80s and 90s. That's from your 50s onwards. 4 out of 5 Brits and Americans are working age 50. But at 65, which is 2 years before retirement, it's down to 1 in 3, 1 in 4. And that's not a choice. People drop out because they're ill, they've got to care for someone who's ill, their skills are out of date, or just ageism in the workplace. So I think we're beginning to see things change because one of the statistics I think is extraordinary. The vast majority of employment growth is now happening because of people aged over 50. In Europe, More than 100% of employment growth comes from people aged over 50. There's hardly any productivity growth in Europe. In other words, all GDP now is about keeping people working beyond the age of 50.
What would you encourage people to do now? Now, if you're in your 30s or 40s or 50s, what would you encourage people to start to think? What is the mental hurdle that I have to leap?
Yeah, so I think one of the issues is we all sort of think about age chronologically, the number of years we've lived. And sort of also very important is how many more years you can expect to come. So just recognize that whatever your job is doing, if you're sort of 30 or 40, given current work trends, you're probably going to be working to your late 60s or early 70s. In other words, you've got more work to do than you've done already. So that requires thinking, wow, is this the path that I want to carry on? What would I do next? You also, I think, got to think very hard because obviously money is really important. If you're living a long life, you need more money. So the only thing is if you just work for longer, just to tackle the financial challenge, you've also got to think about your health. You've got to think about your relationships. You've got to think about your skills. And so you've got to sort of think about a very broad portfolio of assets you've got to start investing in.